Hello, everybody. Good afternoon. This is the webinar for comparing lessons learned from the COVID-19 and climate change messaging. It's brought to you by the Southeast New England Network and the Association of Climate Change Officers. I'm John Kashmar with the Southeast New England Network. And just very briefly, the network is focused on training and technical assistance for stormwater management. Our vision is to build resilient ecosystems and connect communities through action, collaboration, and innovation. And most importantly, we're focused on empowering communities to achieve healthy watersheds, sustainable financing, and long-term climate resilience through management of stormwater and restoration projects. You can find out more at snepnetwork.org. That's SNEP network.org. And I just wanted to provide a few logistics around the call today. There will be a question and answer period at the end. And if you would like to partake in that, please use the raised hand on the panel, the control panel, the hand icon to present your questions, or you can type a question at any point in the dialog box at the bottom, and those will be for the Q&A session at the end. I'd like to now introduce Joanne Throwe. Joanne joins us from Bristol, Rhode Island. She's a core team member for the network, working on innovative financing and leadership development. Joanne is president of Throwe Environmental, as well as a senior fellow at the University of Maryland School of Public Policy Center for Global Sustainability. From 2015 to 2019, Joanne served as deputy secretary for the Maryland Department of Natural Resources. And before that, Joanne was director of Mid-Atlantic Region's Environmental Finance Center, where she worked for over 10 years. Joanne currently chairs US EPA's Environmental Finance Advisory Board, that is responsible for providing innovative financing recommendations to the administrator of the US EPA. In addition, she also serves as a co-chair of the National Stormwater Finance Task Force for the US EPA. And Joanne, I'd like to hand things over to you now.
Thanks, John. I appreciate it. I'm very excited. All these people joining us. I see people logging on now. We've got a good amount of attendees joining our lunchtime conversation. I have two very special guests today, and I'm looking forward to talking with. First, I have Dan Kreeger. Dan, I've known Dan for a few years now. Dan is he is the co-founder and executive director of the Association of Climate Change Officers, ACCO. And Dan is a very unique individual. He has familiarity with climate change and sustainability initiatives, a great sense of humor, but he has honestly been able to undertake what we've seen today, a major voice in the climate change arena. I was able to work with Dan and ACCO in Maryland, my role in Maryland, with the Climate Leadership Academy, and that was the nation's first state-run climate change institution. And you know, it's been just an amazing ride ever since. He has been engaged in quite a bit of conversation that I want to talk to him a little bit about on this call. In addition, we have a powerhouse, Jennifer Watson Roberts. Seriously, I am in awe of your career to date, and she is the director of the Path to Positive Communities at ecoAmerica. But her career in public service and on sustainability and advocacy is one that honestly, we all should admire nationally. Jennifer was the 58th mayor of Charlotte, North Carolina, and before that, she served 4 terms in the Mecklenburg County Board of Commissioners, so she brings unique perspectives from both roles. She also worked as a diplomat and was overseas in the Dominican Republic and Mexico. She ran for Congress. She has had many accolades, but her role, she brings a unique perspective to us in New England. We're planning on getting you up here at some point soon. But she knows about creating public-private partnerships and spearheading creative, innovative new programs. But also, she's been a lifelong advocate. So Jennifer has been all about clean air, clean water, environmental justice, and you know, I know about her success in the stormwater arena, the climate change arena, and I'm thrilled that, you know, she's with ecoAmerica, an amazing nonprofit that I've had the privilege lately of going through so much of the tools and resources on that. At your nonprofit. So I hope to learn a little bit more about path to positive communities. But right now, today on our conversation, we are in such a unique time. We're all trying to navigate this new norm, and we're facing challenges that really go beyond what we're used to at both a personal and professional level. And so right now, our perspective is just one thing that, you know, we're thinking about our family's well-being, you know, our health, our security. Doesn't take away from the importance of, you know, the environmental challenges both of you have dedicated your careers on, and all of us are on this call. We are facing something that requires us to be prepared. It requires us to understand the risk and the ability to face these challenges and what our response is going to be. So response is just so important in how we communicate these messages, how we convey these messages. And, you know, we're starting to think about that in our work, in our daily life, in our professional life. There's ways to act and ways to respond, and they have to be meaningful and impactful. And so what I want to ask you both today, I want to start with your different perspectives, both from a leadership role and also the conversation you're having nationally. And Dan, if I could start with you, I was able to, you know, knowing the work you did in Maryland and also nationally for ACCO, really be able to tap into some of the coffee hours and the town halls you've been having, really to collect information and understand how this message is how is it being portrayed, and what people are feeling. And wonder if you can maybe summarize some of the findings to date.
Yeah, I mean, this is it's an amazing time right now if you can detach from the emotional charge of it, and that's really difficult for everybody because it's a truly devastating time, and we have to figure out how to overcome. And one of the things that we've thought from the beginning and that I've been focused on is immediately in a time of need, my first thought was, let me figure out how my community is being affected by this and not worry about me. And so I immediately turned towards our membership. And there we scheduled a call of a group of folks that I call our elders and our innovators. Some are both, and some are one and some are the other, and they're not necessarily just based on age, but experience and insight, and wanted to see, you know, what were they thinking right off the bat. And this was about 5-6 weeks ago. Right off the bat, we just knew that world was changing, and that we weren't talking about a few weeks. That we were about to enter into a very long tunnel, and that when we came out of the tunnel, that we were going to be coming out looking at something completely different. And so there were conversations that we needed to have with folks about what does life in this tunnel look like right now for folks working on climate change and sustainability, and how does that intersect with what we're experiencing in the context of societal response and institutional response and community response to the pandemic. And then there's this sort of longer term foot in today, foot in tomorrow, as Ray Mabus, the former Secretary of the Navy, would say. Where are there challenges for our field in the long run as a result of this? Where are there opportunities? And there are some really interesting things. We've been teaching the public health implications of climate change for years. There are great reports out there that have been produced by a consortium of organizations from the CDC, from HHS, and such. And if you looked at those impacts and who was being impacted hardest, which is at the center of the international climate dialogues of who gets hit hardest by climate change in marginalized communities. Oh, look, don't we just find that we are seeing the exact same communities being hit hardest by this pandemic? But in both instances, did we succeed in getting the message out with the right messengers? No, that wasn't happening. And all of a sudden in the last week, our societal consciousness has suddenly caught up. And there's an interesting opportunity to have conversations that, frankly, we haven't been having in large scale. They've been side niche conversations. So that was kind of one thing. Second was I see a field of practice that is not considered essential. We're working on climate change and sustainability. I've got members who've been furloughed, who've been laid off, who may be still employed and paid, but have been basically told, yeah, you're off to the side, your work doesn't matter right now, and you may be reassigned into another role. And there's some good reasons for that. There are some bad reasons for it. On the bad reason side, a failure of a field of practice to convey the essence of its existence and its value to institutions is at the heart of it. If you're not essential, it's because you're not valued appropriately. But on the flip side, if you're in Florida and you're a professional wrestler, you're essential. What does that say in the context of you work on climate resilience, but if you can do this, you're essential? By the way, I'm a professional wrestling fan, but I'm just saying the context of that messaging is really eye-opening. There's people who see opportunity. We know that there are going to be stimulus dollars going out. How do we get the right communities working together to be ready this time? The last time there was a stimulus, we weren't. And this requires people to come together in ways, and we're already disaggregated, we're splintered. We tend to want to convene by our sector or by some other commonality. We don't work well across organizational boundaries and jurisdictions. We tend to not trust people who come from a different walk of life than we're accustomed to. And these are all challenges in communicating effectively and in leveraging a community that could be really vital assets. And there's so many skills within the climate change and sustainability communities, supply chain management and materials management. Good God, if ever those were important. But have we effectively communicated that? But boy, we're right now, right in the middle of it. And so these things have been coming out in conversations, and we're looking and saying, okay, there's that. And then there's also just dealing with the personal resilience of people in the front line. Before any of this happened, I saw people breaking down in our classrooms, in our conferences, because being on the front lines of climate change and seeing the devastation that is forecasted is tough. And so personal resilience becomes really important. So framing this and can we do better? We can do better, as Nancy Smith from the Boston Public Health Commission wrote to me the other day. Hashtag, we can do better. And I think this is our opportunity to start framing things differently, communicating and getting the right messengers in front of the right audiences. And I thought this was a good way to open this conversation.
Boy, you got that right. And I should tell our audience that you are living in Florida, right? So now we know you're a wrestling fan. Good gracious, the things I learned. So at this time, right now, we have, preparation is so important, but, facts matter, science matter, transparency matters, honesty matters, but quite frankly, people matter and leadership matters. So that brings me to you, Jennifer. You have been working in the public arena for a long time, and the public engagement is just so important. How do we get community leaders to bring public opinion forward, and can we make a difference? Can we truly make a difference moving forward?
Well, Joanne, thanks for the question, and thanks for having me on today. And I just want to say a couple of things before I answer the question. And one is that I acknowledge many of you who are listening, that you are in extraordinary times, that you are having to juggle family and work and displacement. Many of you may have family members who are on the front line, who are healthcare workers or impacted in other ways. Many of you may have lost folks. So I just want to acknowledge that. And recognize these are extraordinary times. And we appreciate you being here today, hanging here with us, and continuing to focus on a long-term crisis, which is actually here with us now, and that's our climate crisis. So thank you for what you are all doing. And I do have one connection to New England. I shared this earlier with Joanne and Dan. I lived for 2 years in Windsor, Connecticut, and taught at the Loomis Chaffee School, and I have spent time in a kayak on the Farmington River and the Connecticut River, which is kind of big and scary. So I appreciate the water in New England and watershed protection and all that you all are doing. So thank you so very much. So back to the question of public engagement. It is absolutely essential, and I can say as having been both an activist on the outside and then being a public official, an elected official on the inside, working with folks in our community, public engagement makes such a huge difference. First of all, we're in a democracy. And so every citizen, every resident has the right to have a voice to help shape our future policy. And I love when I hear other mayors say the same thing, and that is that just because I'm in office doesn't mean that I'm the smartest person in the room. And so when you engage the public, not only do they feel vested in the outcomes and feel like they're part of the solution, but they can be the solution, because you may have someone in the audience. I remember once talking about an issue, and there was someone in the audience who had a PhD in what I was talking about. And so I turned to this person and said, "Can you explain this better than I can?" And he did. And that's what, we need to recognize, that there are a lot of great ideas out there that can come from every corner of our community and every demographic. And when you engage the public in a positive way that is empowering, you can capture those ideas. And the other part of that is that then folks feel vested, they feel like they've been heard, they're going to actually help you implement policy. So one of the things that we have that works great in Mecklenburg County and Charlotte is we have folks who are watching out, who are adopting stormwater drains. And we have our citizens who are engaged in helping keep things clean, because our city workers can't be everywhere. When you have things like that that help them feel part of, it builds the community, it builds their connection to their local government, and all of a sudden they have ownership. And so they're the one who can tell their neighbor, "Hey, don't put your motor oil in the stormwater drain, because that goes straight to our rivers." Then you don't have to do it as city officials and come in with a heavy hand. And so that sense of community, building that community, is so important. And I have also seen, when you're building something long-term, so any infrastructure project, we had a light rail project where this happened. When it takes several years, I've seen officials forget to give updates, forget to include the public along the way, because there are adjustments and tweaks as you're building something that you can make. And when you forget to include them, and all of a sudden you're at the end, when you may need to have their input for, say, a green bond that needs to get passed or something else, they may push back because they haven't seen the progress along the way. And all of a sudden they're like, "Whoa, what's this new stormwater bill I'm getting?" If you keep engaged and you make it regular and you make it accessible, and by the way, you look, I know Dan mentioned this about equity. You need to look for those communities that may not be digitally connected, that may have a language barrier, the folks who are lower income, who may not have internet at home, all these things. Make sure you look for those marginalized communities and include them early in the process. Ask for their advice as well. We've seen this in parts of our country where Indigenous folks and Native Americans have been working with climate issues for literally centuries, and they actually have better techniques than some of the trained Forest Service folks. They have been training folks out in California how to do these micro burns that they've been doing for a long time to help prevent the huge wildfires with all the underbrush that's there. So just some of the examples that I see in my work as I talk to communities around the country, that I know from the experience that I have had. Public engagement is so important. It has to be consistent, it has to be regular, it has to be inclusive. And you want to show, the other part of that is you want to show that you are implementing some of the things that you're hearing from your residents, and you're including them in those solutions.
You know, Jennifer, to that point, and Joanne, sorry to jump in, the consistent messaging is such a challenge. The average term of a local elected official in America is 4.2 years. I worked in the Department of Defense, and when I was there was a mindset there. The clouds change like the weather, and yeah, we'll just ride them out. That was at a civil servant level. There's an interesting challenge in how do you get the right consistent message if there's, and we've seen in the country, I mean, the polarization and historically, political power changes from party to party. We saw it in 10, we saw it in 18. It's going to happen again. It's inevitable. This has happened historically for 2 centuries now in this country. And yet, if we look at the pandemic, and we see some of the polls on trust and confidence, Tony Fauci is a name that is resonating. Tony Fauci has been the voice on pandemics for 30 some years through going back to HIV. And so the country looks to him because he's been the voice. And I think one of our challenges, especially at the local level, is figuring out how to get consistent voice that's credible, that is the right messenger for the right audiences and the right circumstances, and to have that be a long-term investment. And I think in the long run on climate change, we're looking through the lens of health, security, and economic vitality. We need to have those voices, and those voices, I mean, the job description of an elected official in America, the qualifications is not subject matter expertise, it's charisma. And so we need to get to that, and I love charisma. I wish I had some, but we've got to get to a point that we've got that steady voice and where we invest in that. And I think we've missed on that, but there's an opportunity to change that.
But
Absolutely.
Dan, you know, I think that tone and content are so important right now. We always hear about words that work. You know, how do we reflect the right words to the right audience? How do we make it resonate so we're not offensive? So we drive home our point and, you know, move forward. What can you recommend? What can you share with us based on your experience?
Well, you know, it's interesting. You all are absolutely framing this question, this issue, in ways that we have research to support at ecoAmerica. And I'm going to give folks 2 websites real quickly, because we have many more resources than I can talk about in the next 30 minutes on our websites. One is ecoamerica.org, and the other is path2positive.org. Path with a T-O spelled out, path to positive. We have guides on how you message, on how you work across party lines, about how you find common values to really build a foundation of that trust and that connection, how you build that community. And your point about trusted messengers is so correct. We do find in our research, and we've done polling on this through the years, we know that people trust medical professionals. That includes doctors and nurses and physicians and school nurses, and so many of the folks that our families have contact with. People do trust them, especially as it relates to our health and to science. And we know that health is a big factor in this pandemic and in climate change. We know that health is a major motivator for Americans. We know that mothers care greatly about their children's health. Fathers do too. We know that people care about inequities in health. They know that, for example, African-American children have asthma at 4 times the rate of white children because of some systemic racism, some displacement, some ways that we have built our communities. And people care about that fairness. They care about their safety. And when you're looking at preparation that is good for a pandemic, we saw it happen in Korea and Singapore and other places that had testing that rolled things out quickly and how they flattened that curve. And we've seen where preparation makes a difference in climate. whether it's mitigation or resilience. And by the way, the other thing that we tell people to do is to describe, not to label. And so when you say mitigation, a lot of folks in the community don't really know what that means. So you have to explain that that is taking the carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere, reducing emissions, keeping things out of our waters to keep them clean, all those things. Describe them in terms that people understand and that they can relate to in their everyday lives. That is, absolutely a great way to communicate. And by the way, just an interesting fact in our research, when we look at, what messengers do people trust? They trust the scientists. They also trust faith leaders, depending on, your faith tradition. But way down at the bottom is Congress. So
I mean, Congress has had a 10% approval rating for the entirety of my adult life.
That's right. They're just not very trusted. And that challenge about in and out of public office, that is so true. But we know that staff keeps that continuity and keeps that together. And there are values that persist as well. Our messaging does also talk about how you want to connect across party lines, because there are certain terms that are dog whistles for immediate resistance. And so we have guidance in those resources that talk about, being strong, family values, community values, energy independence. I mean, there's so many things that resonate with both sides of the aisle. And we absolutely can keep these ideas in mind as we rebuild after this pandemic. And we're going to need everyone's voices to do that in a fair and just way.
There's an interesting challenge that you have to supplement, though. Some trusted messengers are really good at diagnosing, and diagnosis is really good at getting people's attention. And if there's a sense of urgency, which we're certainly seeing with the pandemic, because there's the if-then statement has a 1-month turnaround right now. The climate change if-then statement is multi-generational from most people's perspectives. And so you see it in, for instance, if you go look at the Six Americas research, which assesses the attitudes and mindsets of Americans on climate change, it gets really interesting when you start to ask them, okay, 2/3 of Americans are concerned about climate change and think it's happening. You start to get to the understanding their analytics of that. High numbers in the 60+% still think, yeah, it's going to harm future generations. You start to get to the and it's still 60%ish that it will harm people in developing nations. It'll harm plants and animals. You get to it will harm me. That number drops to 42% nationally, and from some communities even lower, because you can downscale it to the county, I think even to the zip code. When you see that and that gap, there's a really interesting challenge. And so messenger can't just be about shock into response, because the response needs to be sustained galvanization. And so we need messengers that also turn this into we've got to find a way to move from scare to opportunity. And in order to sustain a galvanized effort, you can't have people in a paralyzed state of fear. And you'll even see it in the context of this pandemic. People are going to get cabin fever. And you already see it in the politicals. I supported shutting down for a month. I'm not going to support shutting down for a year. At some point, they're going to say, okay, we've got to get out. And so getting into the opportunity space with the right messengers is crucially important. And to have opportunities that everyone can relate to, you need to have a wide range of those folks participating in the process.
Well, but Dan, there is no one size fits all message, right? I mean, we have to tailor it, but how do we know how to tailor it with that sense of sensitive? We have to be sensitive. We have to be compassionate. So, crafting that message and making the point and, moving forward towards recovery, what can you do to, help us with framing that out?
Yeah, on that, and I think we actually have some lessons learned on the pandemic and in the history of climate change communications as well. You know, the first messaging around the pandemic was if you were older than 60 years old, you were in trouble. And first impressions matter. And because of that, there are large communities that just, you know, spring breakers who were out on the beach like, oh, well, hey, this only affects 60-year-olds, so that, you know, it doesn't apply to me. Well, messaging that was oriented toward them as you know, hey, first of all, you could be hospitalized by this, you could actually be killed by it, but that was also more in the you can transmit this and hurt people you care about, should have been at the beginning alongside messaging to a different audience that is, hey, you need to stay home and stay away because you actually will be in that higher probability range. We didn't do that with the pandemic. And in the context of, so there wasn't a one size fits all there that worked because we missed it and the cat was out of the bag. On the climate change front, climate change affects people so differently based on the community they're in, based on the sector that they work in, based on their professional role, the things that they care about, their cultural values. And so there's never going to be a one size fits all. And that was the sort of, well, we have to act on climate change because it's the moral thing. Well, no, at the end of the day, people are oriented based on their values and their priorities. And it turns out if you go look at, for instance, the Pew polls that they do every year on Americans' top priorities for voting, you go look at the top 20 things in the list, and I think climate change last year just broke into the top 20 for the first time. It was always between 20 and 25. But if you look at the things on that list that people care about, health, well, if you care about your health, you will not be healthy without a climate that is stable, predictable, and enables us to be healthy. If you want to have a vibrant labor workforce, if you want to have a vibrant economy, I mean, these are all things that if you're worried about terrorism, I mean, these are all things that are impacted by climate change. So we have to be able to assess the intersection with those values and communicate in line with those values with the right messengers. And that's what makes it really challenging is that's a lot of work.
You know, Dan, the other thing that strikes me when you look at those impacts and wanting to feel like everybody is connected to those impacts and that moral connection. I remember the young people saying, you know, what if I bring this to my grandmother, my grandfather? You know, having that, it's just one step away from you. But the other important thing that you mentioned is that turning quickly to solutions and the co-benefits, the win-win. You know, when we talk about clean energy, we talk about a job creator, we talk about something that doesn't pollute, we talk about clean air, we talk about it being cheaper. I mean, it is so much cheaper to have wind and solar. And you know what? You don't have to keep buying your energy source because it comes up every day in the morning. You know, so there are a lot of things that you can talk about that everybody goes, wow, you know, that's going to help no matter what. You know, for those who still are deniers or who are not sure that they're really seeing the impacts here and now, when you start to put together all those benefits they're going to see, take active transportation. I've seen a lot more people bicycling because they don't go as far. They may not be going to work. They might be just going down in the corner. They're also getting exercise. They also know that they've got, you know, that 6 feet of distance, so they're safe exercising that way. Sometimes runners are not. But all of a sudden you have a non-polluting form of transportation. You're getting exercise, you're improving your health, and you're improving your attitude. You know, we haven't talked about mental health, but that is another thing that is impacted greatly during this pandemic and with the climate change. Anybody who's been through severe weather and has had people have to actually evacuate. You know, here in North Carolina, we had 2 severe hurricanes 2 years apart. We were still recovering from Michael when Florence hit. And so we have, you know, we have schools that still have mold in them. We have displaced people. You know, during Katrina, which is, you know, New Orleans is 800 miles from here, we had 4,000 people from New Orleans come to Charlotte and seek out a new life. Some of them returned, many of them didn't. And so when we look at those impacts, we are all connected, but we absolutely know that there are great benefits to being prepared, to building community, to looking at clean air and clean energy, and to doing all the things to protect our water source. I thought, we started doing some work in Florida, and they have algal blooms that have closed down the coast and closed down restaurants. And I've discovered that all over our country, there are algal blooms. All over our country, there, are waters that are warming and nutrients that are growing these algae that are toxic. And that is, killing your pets. And there's so many things that are happening. But when you look at the good things that we can do and the jobs that we can bring and how we can rebuild in a cleaner, more prosperous future, then you start to inspire people to take action.
It's interesting. I looked back after this pandemic started, and I looked back at several of the climate resilience plans that I put together, that I worked on, and then I looked nationally at what I could find that connected more of a health element. And there weren't many nationally that had a big focus on dealing with a pandemic, and more on healthcare. And it has to be such a big part of our whole preparation, our recovery. We need to pay more attention. This is an important piece of climate change and the work we're doing in the environmental arena. There is only so much money, technology, policy solutions that are going to help us recover. We need to get back on the right path. We need those tools, those resources. We need people like both of you and the people on this call who have all this expertise, working together. We're suddenly going to be the advocates. We're going to be in a role that we never thought we'd be in. And having those words that work, having the right message, being sensitive to what that message is, but also building on leadership. And I'm going to call back on you, Jennifer, and I mentioned this early on, but I know about the examples in Charlotte Mecklenburg and the great work you've done, and I'm not going to miss this opportunity to have you on this call when I've got this wonderful network I'm working with in the Southeast New England region, and our work on stormwater and your examples on leadership were just so important moving things forward. So I wondered if you could talk about that just briefly, and also tie in that idea of messaging and how it was effective.
Certainly. So we are one of those very fast growing communities here in Charlotte where our floodplains are changing. And they're changing because of development and because of climate. And we're seeing those, rainstorms where you feel like a bucket is like coming down on your window for like 10 minutes straight. And stormwater is so important, but it's what we call hidden government. And so unless you are working to engage the public on explaining why it's important and why it impacts their health and why it impacts their property values, that's another thing that, by the way, both residents and elected officials care about, because residents see it as an expense and elected officials see it as income and revenue. So property values are very important. Great example that I have from Mecklenburg County is as we're growing, we had a new area being developed along one of our lakes. We have 3 lakes that have that are in our Catawba River, and the county wanted to be preventive, wanted to make sure we weren't getting a lot of organic material in the lake as this development happened. Wanted to make sure that we were keeping the water clean because it was one of the sources of our drinking water. And so they implemented a number of requirements around buffer, around set off, around trees, around the kinds of shrubs and things, around the drainage. And the developer really balked at all this and said, look at the cost that you're adding. Look at this expense. And this is, it's a great place to live. Well, they looked at what the buyers were interested in. They looked at the marketing for the area, and they realized that this actually added value to the property because it was seen as environmentally friendly. It was seen as clean. They were going to be able to swim in the lake because they weren't getting that runoff. They were going to be able to drive down the street in the rain because the stormwater was directed the right way. And so actually what happened after that development opened is the property values were higher, and it became a very sought after place to live. But it's also very much sustainable, in sync, and their engagement with people, the developer and the residents going there about the value they were adding was critical in maintaining the support for that development. And I've already talked about the stormwater program, where we have people actually adopt a stormwater drain. It can be an organization, they put your name on it, and you're supposed to keep that clean. You know, I have another great anecdote. When I was mayor and county commissioner, the office is way up high, and you can look out and see all the streets uptown. We had a visitor from a third world country who was there in one of our massive rainstorms, and he looked out the window and he said, "Oh, your streets are like sponges. They just absorb the water." Because we take for granted the fact that we have stormwater, that we have drains in the United States. A lot of developing countries don't. And when it floods, their cities just shut down, and they have to wait for it to go away because no one can drive through the streets. And so, you know, thinking about that as hidden government, thinking about that engagement with the public, explaining things before, during, and after in ways that residents understand, in ways that harken back to their health, to their property value, to passing along their property to their kids, you know, long-term value, and looking into the future of how this community is going to continue to change and be stressed by development, by climate, by some of the changes that we're seeing, but giving residents that opportunity to be part of the solution. And that made a great difference here. One more fun story I have. Part of what we did is a flood buyback program. We saw that there were communities that were being flooded repeatedly. Our fire department, again, firefighters are trusted messengers. Everybody loves their firefighter. They came and gave us a report on how much it costs taxpayers every year to do these rescues, not to mention the lives disrupted. You know, knock on wood, we didn't lose lives, but we had many people displaced. We had to repurpose school gyms with the Red Cross to put in cots that had weight. They lost all their goods. And so when you look at the loss, personal loss, insurance loss, and then the emergency services cost, and you compare that to, let's just buy these 8 properties and restore this to a floodplain and have all kinds of great green things that can help absorb it when the rains come, then it makes a lot of sense to elected officials because you're looking at a cost comparison. It makes sense to the residents because you're saving lives, you're saving property. And we helped those folks who were moving to find other places that were safe. And again, when you had that trusted messenger talk about that and why it's important to do that, you get the community behind it. So the fun story with there is that when we did knock down the buildings, I got to drive the wrecking ball and knock down the first wall.
That's fantastic.
That's awesome.
Jennifer, we will get you back up to New England before you know it, because you have such great stories. Before I open it up quickly to some questions, we've got about 17 minutes. Dan, I'm going to hit you up with something here. You and I was part of your first inaugural class, the Climate Leadership Academy. I was in the first class. There was, you know, a big part of working with the state, trying to, you know, push climate competencies and working with ACCO. And there was so much in terms of developing leaders and having them understand those that necessary messaging and that skill set that is needed to really make change, policy change. Some of your takeaways, you're beyond Maryland, you're, you know, working nationally. So, you know, some of your takeaways on developing the right message, engaging leaders, and, you know, having people move forward in a direction that really can help us recover from this.
Yeah, well, and I'm going to address that, and I want to comment on Jennifer's use of the phrase invisible government, because I think it all applies. You know, 100 years ago, we're a society that's tied to the land. And today we're one where, and I mean like 98% of society 100 years ago is tied to the land. Today it's 2%, less. And what we have is a society that doesn't understand how the lights turn on, how the food gets on the table. where things come from. And as a result, we have behaviors that are completely oblivious to those realities. That needs to change in order for us to affect change, which also becomes a communications and messaging issue. You can't resonate with somebody if they don't understand how things function to begin with. And so I think back, in the early 20th century when London had the underground train being developed, they couldn't get people to take the train. People felt it was beneath them, literally and figuratively. And so to my knowledge, it is one of the first municipal propaganda campaigns called London Underground, where they had a suite of posters, these vibrant colored posters, where they showed the upper class, the nobility, the aristocracy of London going down the stairs into the train, and they made it look like it was pop culture. And they had this whole series of communications efforts to drive a behavior change. But you need to understand the sociology and the psychology and the knowledge of the audiences to effectively communicate, and we have gaps there. And so we need to make some investments there in understanding how do people see things, what do they know, what do they not know, how can we improve that, who are the right messengers, so that we can get there. Because you'd be stunned to see, like, people don't understand it takes water to make energy. It takes energy to move water. And so they don't connect the two. And oh, by the way, some of that is because from a governance standpoint and an infrastructure standpoint, we treat them like they're two completely unrelated things. In most local governments, the people who are working on water aren't working on energy. 12.5% of our nation's energy supply goes to treating and pumping water. Right? I mean, that's a massive amount. We're so disconnected. So that drives us to be emotionally unintelligent. Sometimes it's because we just don't know how to be emotionally intelligent in the context of how people see and understand things. And sometimes it's also just because we're emotionally unintelligent. And if we're going to get good at this stuff, we have to deal with that. That requires education, training, and leadership development. I'm so pleased to have had the honor to have the state of Maryland call me at the time when you were the deputy secretary and say, Dan, we want to build the nation's first state-run climate change academy. Last year, we put more than 500 professionals through 6 days of training. And in order to become a certified climate change professional, which is the credential we administer, but in Maryland, where the governor signs the certificates and at a signing ceremony recognizes CCPs, you have to do the 2-day leadership module that we don't require anywhere else in the country, because Maryland knew that they needed to grow leadership, which included working across organizational boundaries and jurisdictions, communicating with the general public, simulated town hall exercises, communicating with decision makers. These are all things we've got to get good at doing. And I'm pleased that coming out of that, the state of Michigan is engaging us to build a similar effort. The state of Pennsylvania is exploring it. We're going to hopefully be doing some one-day trainings for elected officials in Massachusetts and Rhode Island, either virtually.
No wrestling's involved.
No. I mean, I might pull a guy in or two just for a little entertainment value. And people wouldn't be entertained if I get body slammed, for sure. Trust me, they've been rooting for years. But I think these are things that we're going to have to figure out how to do, and that's difficult. We don't invest in education very well in this country. But if we want to affect public will and support and engagement in what we're doing, we have to invest in their literacy and their education and their training on the subject matter. And we have not done good work there, but we can, and they're really simple solutions for getting there that are actually really cost effective too. And forget cost effective, the return on the investment is, we got Charles County, Maryland, which is the county administrator is your buddy Mark Belton, who was the former Secretary of Natural Resources in Maryland. When S&P came around and did their bond rating for the county in the fall, Mark told the story of how 25 of their senior staff were put into the Maryland Climate Leadership Academy, and S&P cited that as evidence of strong leadership and used that to substantiate the county's AAA rating this year. So now, as the treasurer of Maryland says at the Board of Public Works meeting in January, she says, you know, the next time the county goes to build a school, taxpayers going to pay less for that school because they went and got climate change training. So we're getting a return on investment on that education anyway. So let's do that. And a lot of these things we can make really meaningful change.
You both are so awesome. I'm going to use the last 10 minutes, not for myself, but to open up and raise your hand, folks, if you would like me to unmute you and ask my special guest here today a question. Otherwise, I'm going to keep going. But please, we'd love to hear from you. So I'm looking, just raise your hand or push the button. Okay, well, guess what? I know there was a couple that was sent in prior to, so I'm going to go with that unless I see a hand or a question.
Go for it.
I'm going to go for it. So we have what messaging can be used with elected officials to demonstrate the practical and cost effectiveness of preparedness? And I think that came from Westerly. I think we touched on it a bit, but perhaps Jennifer, do you want to elaborate a little bit more?
Sure, and yeah, we touched on it a little bit, but it's always good to understand that elected official, know your audience. If you're going for the whole board or you're going for one particular person who is an advocate for clean water, for preparation. If you're going for somebody who's a little bit harder, you might focus on some different things. One thing I will say is that if you're sending an email, remember that the whole board votes on things, so send it to everybody. Send it to the person who maybe is your representative, but then copy everyone. Also, the other hint is to put in the subject line what it is you want them to do. So, please support, water buffers for our river. Put that in the subject line. And then you want to connect. We always our byline at ecoAmerica and Pat the Positive is start with people. So you always want to make a connection. You always want to show empathy and kindness and generosity and make that human connection. So you're not just somebody demanding, but you're understanding. My kids really enjoy playing in this stream, but I've noticed lately it's, full of plastic floating by. Can we do something about plastic bags? Which, by the way, are in danger because of the pandemic, people thinking that reusable bags are carriers of germs, which has not been substantiated by science. So be on the lookout.
No, but you know what has been substantiated by science?
What? Plastic.
The germ on plastic for 2 weeks.
Right. Exactly. Well, exactly. So make your point quickly and connect on them on a human basis, and then end with an ask that is clear and understandable. Absolutely.
That's perfect. People don't want to be unmuted, but I'm getting some other questions. So I'll tee this up for either of you. Is there an opportunity to message around the immediate improvements to air quality we've seen from people working from home? It feels such a big problem that the individual can't help in a substantial way, but the pandemic shows that we can see and measure changes quickly by a change in our actions. Who'd like to take that one?
I'm going to go with a yes and a but. And you're not supposed to use but because but apparently negates anything that precedes it. I say this as an English major.
Dan, keep in mind I have 7 minutes left. Okay,
yes.
Go.
We can. There's an immediate notice. There's some really interesting, you can see it in the air. People are experiencing it. They don't need to see it in the news. They're seeing it in their communities. The key is having that change be valued, because we treat the environment like the word it is, our surrounding, and our surrounding is pretty, but the environment is not our surrounding, it's our life essence. And when we change that to what good air quality means is X, Y, and Z that people value, then yes. And I think we absolutely can turn that around. And we are going to see some measurements. We're already seeing people going to work on those data points. I think you're going to see really substantial transformations. It's also going to correlate, by the way, with us having confidence in remote working in some areas where we're going to say, you know what, hey, we can actually save some money, reduce some office space, and yada, yada, yada. But yes, we absolutely can. And that's going to help communities that are more likely to succumb to heat stroke, to asthma, and those sorts of challenges that we see in high ozone days and high heat days. So yes, absolutely. But we've got to figure out how to make this value.
Yeah, and
All
I would
right,
just add one.
Jennifer.
Sorry, I add one more thing, and that is what it shows is what is possible if everybody agrees on the value of action.
Yeah.
It is possible to clean our air, and everyone agrees that less using of gas guzzling vehicles is part of that. Then amazing things can happen.
Oh, I love
That's
it.
such a good point, because
Yep. Go ahead, Dan.
that part is so important, because there is a large segment, not large, there's a meaningful segment of people who believe climate change is happening, but also feel like, well, shoot, it's too big, we can't fix it, so I'm just going to enjoy myself. And this just goes to show, and by the way, the Olympics in Beijing showed it a few years ago too, that we actually can drive some really substantial change. Now, that was with a really acute, shutdown, but look how quickly the results came in. So, over a longer planning period, we actually can do this.
So both of you, we're almost out of time. I could do this for another hour, but luckily, Dan, you're going to join me next week again, right? We can have lunch together next week. Jennifer,
I'm bringing lunch then.
Oh, good. Jennifer, you've been amazing. I will continue to engage ecoAmerica and you. Thank you for being such an amazing leader. And really, forget Windsor. Come up to Rhode Island and Massachusetts, okay?
Absolutely.
So, and both. Any final parting words, any thoughts you want to leave us with?
I would just reiterate that in a democracy, everybody makes a difference. Everyone can have a voice. And if you are a policymaker or an policy implementer, you need to bring the public with you. That's going to make a big difference for our action on climate. And here's our little guide about how to talk about it.
Oh, great. We need all the guides we can get. That's terrific.
Yeah. And thank you for having me.
We have got to get to having, in local governments, we've got to get to having organization-wide capacity. And we're a highly specialized society, which creates an interesting challenge. If you're a big local government, you've got silo problems. You've got lots of capacity, but they don't interact with each other well. And if you're a small local government, you don't have enough of the specialized support. You've got more people wearing 12 hats, and they're Jacks and Jills of all trades, but they're besieged. We've got to build people's understanding of climate and health and security and economy in the context of a changing world. And climate change is one aspect of it. There are others too, but we've got to build literacy where it's needed. We need to build competency where it's needed, and we need to build leadership where it's needed. And that needs to happen now. And if ever there was a time where it could be done, it's now. So let's use this time wisely.
Terrific. So next week, April 24th from 12 to 1, we will have another webinar. I hope everybody has enjoyed this one on messaging, but next week we will talk about the intersection between pandemic preparedness and recovery and climate preparation, disaster and recovery. We'll have 3 other guests joining us from Fort Lauderdale. We've got Baltimore City and others. So we hope everybody will join us. We hope this has been of value and of interest. I know I've really enjoyed it. And Dan and Jennifer, you're amazing. So keep doing what you do. And thanks for joining us today. Have a great day. Everybody stay healthy. Bye.
Thanks, Emil.
Thanks.